40 days has a certain completeness. Hebrews 7 times 7 is even more perfect, and that will happen at Pentecost. Well, Pentecost is the 50th day, Pentecoste Himera, but these 40 days also have their completeness corresponding to all these other 40 days that we've had in salvation history. And in the Old Rite, as you have seen, the candle, the Paschal candle, is extinguished. It is now, what is it? What happens? Something does happen in time and geography at this point in the Holy Land, 2,000 years ago. There are 2 points in geography that come to mind where I was moved. One was, it's fairly simple actually because it belongs to the Muslims, therefore it's not developed. It's the place where, according to unbroken tradition, he did actually leave the earth, leaving his footprint, which you can kiss there. The other, not on the Mount of Olives, but in Galilee, is a place also linked with this mystery, but in a different way. If you climb, and I mean climb, it's very high, Mount Tabor, when you go into the sacred area, you will see a plaque which says, ancient tradition has it, that this is the point at which not only did the Transfiguration take place, but it was the place of a rendezvous that the Lord gave to them. Do you remember how the women had to tell them to go to Galilee? And also in Matthew, they went to the place where they knew they had to go. It was the place of encounter, and there the commissioning took place. All authority in heaven and on earth has been committed to me, and he gives them that authority. Power and authority to teach. The church teaches in his name. What happened? We have only the tip of the iceberg with regard to what happened in the 40-day period, but we can fill in the gaps with our imagination, because Luke does say that he does, over 40 days, appear to them, eat with them, and so on. We have enough, however, to have an idea that he was making himself close and available, choosing even to eat, to prove that it wasn't just some kind of apparition. But here, something changes. Place yourself in imagination, maybe at Mount Olivet, where the disciples are looking on, and these words which we have just heard in the introit, Viri Galilee, men of Galilee, why do you look up to heaven? This same Jesus, and so on, is going to come back. And these are angels all dressed in white. Again, that brightness that we have got used to both on Tabor and at the tomb. So we have here something which, although close to us, surpasses our comprehension. They are looking up. There is a departure. And we hear again a cloud absorbing him, as on Mount Tabor, a bright cloud, and he is lost from view. But do you remember that they were told not to do anything in the immediate future? They were to wait until they were empowered. It's the first novena of history. This moment between now and Pentecost, the stillness and awaiting, tarry in Jerusalem. We need to do the same and not just do our own thing, waiting for an inspiration, waiting for the initiative from on high. Let him be the prime mover. Now, all those who have gone before us have also in some way ascended or descended. All souls do at that point move. There is a departure. I'd like to dwell on this for a few seconds because it's where it hits us personally, this departure. Every one of us here, over a life, will encounter this departure in many, many forms. Normally, a Christian death, well prepared, is not actually a tragedy. It's just the fruit falling off the tree when it's ripe. It's homeward bound. There's a loss, but it's not a tragedy. The only tragedy, really, the only irreversible tragedy, I mean, is the loss of the soul. All else is relative. Think now of all these moments of being at the frontier that you have had. All these people that you have watched dying and then afterwards seen death. As we do in Ireland, they still expose the body for a good while. People kiss the head and so on. And in that way they're able to absorb the departure and the grief. It didn't happen in COVID, and it has. Well, I know from experience that in the monastic life, when one watches a dead person, or rather a dying person first of all, and then a dead person after he's dead until he's put into the grave, which is not protected by a coffin, it's just the body going in the strict monastic life, earth going over the head, only the hood up to protect it, dust unto dust, ashes unto ashes. That there, even though there's a sadness of missing a confrere, there is actually a feeling of victory, similar to what we had in the war. You may have seen those pictures of Churchill going around. Victory, ultimate victory. And one sees there what matters and what matters less. But also we are handling already in anticipation our own death each time we are at a funeral. A good death is actually a very great grace. There used to be a devotion called Bon Amours, the devotion praying for a good death, and it was in the litany, from sudden death, unprepared death, deliver us, O Lord. And that means that we should never be unprepared. Just a few days ago, again, Providence intervened because normally my phone is completely off until usually I'm going to sleep in the night. I just put it once a day to catch up on all the messages to avoid availability which is immediate. And it just happened that I opened it in the course of the day, which I wouldn't do normally. I forget the reason now, but it turned out that there was a reason which I didn't know. Somebody was trying to get through because a dear friend had unexpectedly died. I went over immediately to the remaining family and got the bits of news. Now, these are not just indifferent, because they show that heaven does, at the last moment, take into account a whole life, and in particular, a certain orientation. I'll just tell you what I heard. The friend in question, he had just turned 90, and we'd actually gone over to see him for that occasion just a few weeks ago. And actually you can see him on YouTube because I had interviewed him about a few minutes long. The title was On How to Succeed in Marriage, with his wife, who was actually 2 years older than he. And I had no idea that he would soon not be with us. Well, he had a great devotion to St. Joseph. He would never go to sleep without always having said the complete cloak of St. Joseph, which takes about half an hour. St. Joseph was looking after everything in his life, family and house, and he was everywhere to be seen. And he had many graces at the last. One already was the remote preparation. He always coming to confession. By the end I would go to them because it was difficult for them to come to me, but always every month for years. Confessions well prepared. But then, not long after the last time I'd had him for confession, he felt unwell and they got an ambulance. And a good priest in the hospital gave him in full lucidity the anointing, and he had viaticum in complete lucidity. And his son was there, and he told us this: about 3 to 4 in the night, the heart of the night, his eyes opened. He was looking. And he started to ask his son, "Well, can't you see? St. Joseph! St. Joseph! He's there!" The son couldn't see, but he was looking. He wasn't imagining it. Joseph was showing that he had taken into account all those cloaks of Joseph he'd never ever omitted for years. And I've come across many similar stories about deaths of people who loved God and only wanted heaven. Things happen at the last moment. Either family members or something else. The eyes often open and they're not looking at those present, but into a different realm. At that point, the frontier is very, very thin between time and eternity, geography and space that we cannot fathom. But, it's a huge but, there's an awful, awful difference between that and the other kind of death, which by now is more and more prevalent. The suicide option, people who gradually, without knowing it, shorten their lives through bad health habits, smoking, drug taking, alcohol consummation, and so on. It's all a lack of respect for life. And how many sad ends that leads to. I'd like to conclude with just those two extremes. For even though we have, thank God, the waiting room in between, because few of us will be ready, if we're honest, to see God just like that. Nevertheless, the movement is essentially upwards or downwards. No one can cancel the problem. All one can do is dismiss it and put it on a back burner. But the problem can't go away. Listen to these two extremes. This is November the 2nd, 1890, from Purgatory. After all the years of purification, undergone partly by the nun left behind, the one who's gone eventually comes out with this. I'm going to try and give you some understanding, insofar as you can have an understanding on earth, of what heaven is. It is a succession, an uninterrupted succession of feasts that are ever new. A continuously new bliss that one has never, so it seems, hitherto felt. It's a torrent of joy that overflows without ceasing over all the elect. Heaven, it's God above all. God loved, tasted, relished. It is, in a word, satiety of God, and yet without being satiated. And notice, and the more the soul has loved God upon earth, the closer she has come to the summit of perfection, the more too does she love God and comprehend him in heaven. Thérèse of Lisieux explained it like this: both the ocean and the thimble are full. Jesus is the true joy of earth and the eternal joy of the heavens. And this, unfortunately, comes from the other side. As for me, at the moment of my death, I woke suddenly out of the fog. I found myself as though flooded by a dazzling light. Now, the reason for that is that there's no more distraction from the body. Senses no longer are the channels of communication, but the soul itself perceives. I was on the very spot on which my corpse was lying. It was as it happens in the theatre, when in one go all the lights go out, leaving nothing to be seen but the stage. The curtains separate with a great din and open on an unexpected scene, horribly luminous, the scene of my life. We have testimony of that also from somebody who is now a preacher, I believe. His name is Howard Storm. He had an NDE, but he was really there. His heart stopped beating completely, and he was shown his whole life, and he was amazed what was important in his life. Anything that he'd done in the sports field was zero, but any act of kindness made a big, big difference in the balance. As though in a great mirror, my soul showed itself to itself, the graces spanned, from my early days right up to the last no in God's face. The Lord had been trying to pull her on that Sunday morning to go to church. No! I felt like an assassin who during a judicial prosecution has just been presented with his lifeless victim. Now, this is only one moment after death. Had all this been thought about before, all her eternity would have been completely different. But there, the soul is fixed. Be ashamed? Never! And yet, neither could I resist under the eyes of God, whom I had rejected. One thing alone was left to me. Escape! As Cain ran away from the corpse of his brother Abel, by the way, that's true, because the voice of Cain has come out in exorcism in Germany. In case of Anneliese Miguel, he was down there, and therefore he existed, and the story must be true. As Cain ran away from the corpse of his brother Abel, even so was my soul repelled outside, far away from this horrid sight. It was the particular judgment. Now, the general judgment, the body also will have a part, and we will see others. It's only fair, because what we do has an impact on others too, and it's not just a private affair. It was the particular judgment. The invisible judge was saying, depart from me. And the soul itself chooses to depart because it can't go towards God. To do so would be to burn. We go with what we carry. This week, I was talking to two lovely French priests who have the care, possibly with others, of this great sanctuary not far from La Trappe in Normandy. It's Montligeon. It's completely dedicated to the souls in purgatory. And they gave me to understand what had happened. It was, in the 1800s, a good priest, Père Buguet, was just a good and holy parish priest, who had a devotion that nobody knew about. Every Monday, he would offer a Holy Mass for the most abandoned soul in purgatory. One day, this lady came and wanted a Holy Mass, which he accepted. But then she came back, dressed more smartly. And she said how pleased God was that he offered this Mass for the most abandoned soul in purgatory every Monday. And he didn't know how she could have known. No one knew. From that time on, he felt he had to do something, and through providence was able to build this massive sanctuary which does nothing but pray for the souls in purgatory. A friend of mine has done a tiny version of that in South Armagh. Well, it hit me. These also are our friends. What we do for the souls in purgatory comes back to us many times over. And I've heard this from more than one source. What one does for the souls in purgatory leads sometimes to obtaining graces that even the saints themselves find difficult in obtaining for us. They're so grateful. And they also remind us, listen, time passes. It's only a short time, what we call life. And as the Americans say, you're dead a long time.